Welcome back to Zelda 2. Just south of the town of Ruto is the cave that you need to pass through in order to enter the next part of the game, and to pass through this cave you must have the jump spell because there's a cliff that is impassable without a higher jump. Now, this upcoming section of the game, I'm kind of doing things a little bit out of order, but the next section of the game that I'm going to take on is very, very difficult for new players, and especially difficult if you only have Life 1 and Magic 1, so I'm actually going to be taking the next couple of Life and Magic levels. I'm not going to go straight to Attack 8 at the start of the game. That would take quite a while. So we just clear past a couple of Gorias and some enemies on the ground that I can't remember the names of, and then we have the first screen with a required use of a magic spell, a very expensive one at this point in the game too. The jump spell takes 3 whole bars off my magic meter, and that's kind of annoying. Yeah, there's going to be a couple more places where you have to use a magic spell to progress, and I've never liked that idea. If the magic meter is a resource that you can use on things like reducing damage, then it doesn't really make sense to require it for progress in certain areas. Like, I know that they want to stop you from leaving the first area of the game until you have a very important tool in your toolbox, but in certain places in the game that's going to get very annoying. So, next up, there is a cabin in this upcoming forest that we have to go into for reasons that will become apparent later. And surrounding that cabin are a bunch of tiles with forced encounters. So, luckily, the encounters are all invisible, but I know where they all are, so I can just find the cabin immediately. And inside is a man known as Bagu. Now, this is a very weird name, but it's actually related to the guy who called himself Error, because Error and Bagu, well, Bagu is supposed to be bug, so Error and bug, it's video game glitch terms. So next up we have to cross this bridge, which has flying fish enemies. Apparently these guys were imported from the Mushroom Kingdom, because this is just like the bridges with the Cheep-Cheeps flying over them in the Mario games. I guess that's a bit of a shout out, but these ones shoot fireballs, or rocks actually. Your shield can't block fireballs. So next we enter the water town of Saria. Yeah, I guess there's no relation between the towns and the sages they're named after. Anyways, this guy says eyes of Ganon are everywhere, which is supposed to be a warning that certain NPCs in this town, when talked to, get this, they turn into enemies. And they can actually kill you. So yes, there are spies in town. Luckily, they are easily avoided. You just have to not talk to any of the random NPCs. And this lady has, the tragedy of the century. She's lost her mirror. Luckily, it's located in a completely different house, and, wait for it, Link talks. Like, I have no idea if this is just his thoughts or if he's actually speaking it, but that's actual dialogue from Link. So, there you go. So yes, the mirror is under that table. I don't really know how you're supposed to know that you can check under the table by pressing the B button there. Like, there's a bunch of, little things like that. This game, I don't want to say it's as cryptic as Zelda 1, but there's still some stuff that's cryptic, and that's not even really cryptic. That's just not letting the player know that you can check some places throughout the game by pressing the B button in front of them. So the spell we get for this very easy task is the life spell, which is a recovery spell, and it's even more expensive. At this level, this will take out my entire magic meter, or just shy of my entire magic meter. So expensive, but it is a life recovery spell, so I guess it makes sense that it's expensive, but geez. Definitely gonna start leveling magic as well. So, I apologize for the low health beeping, but the healer is on the other side of town, and I would have to walk all the way there and back in order to stop the beeping. But thankfully that's no longer a problem, and the beeping will only persist if I take too many hits. So in order to cross the river in this town, you have to have met Bagu for some reason. I don't know why his note is credential enough to cross into. I am not kidding. Just past this river is Death Mountain. That's right, the location of Ganon's lair from the previous Zelda game. So this is actually a very interesting part of the game. You actually go into Death Mountain, and when you come out the other side, you will notice that the overworld looks like the overworld from Zelda 1. The layout is kind of similar, which is a great way of indicating continuity between the two games. Anyways, the reason Death Mountain is a very, very beginner-unfriendly place is that they make you navigate this very vast network of caves and tunnels. It's very confusing to somebody without a map. I mean, Death Mountain was very confusing in Zelda 1, so it's fitting, but they also put a bunch of really powerful enemies in these caves and tunnels that you have to fight through. And for the beginning player, especially this early in the game when you don't necessarily have a bunch of levels in you already, that's going to be very difficult. Like, this Goria is not difficult at all. I just made a mistake and backed him up against the wall. That's not where you want to put a Goria, because then you won't be able to predict where the boomerangs are coming out. Anyways, yeah, you can see that I'm getting wrecked at life 2, so that life spell that recovers your health is going to come in very handy. And another problem is that you have to do all of this on just 3 lives, unless you find some of the 1-ups in the game. But 1-ups, let me tell you right now, I'm not going to pick up any 1-ups at all, because as soon as you pick them up, you can only pick them up once per save file, because after you pick them up, they never show up again. So it's kind of a waste to pick them up unless you know you need them. Anyways, I've already killed one of the new enemies that I was going to talk about, so I suppose we'll talk about it more when I get to the next one. So in this cave, we have a bridge over lava with a bunch of those flying fish enemies again, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but there are enemies in this game. This is really cheap, by the way. They just shot 2 rocks out. If I blocked one, then I was going to get hit by the other no matter what. Those enemies can actually drain your experience points, which is another thing that makes this game really tough on beginners. I mean, it's not that much EXP, but still. And this enemy... well, this is a much tougher variation of the enemy that I was going to talk about. These enemies are called Dyras. Yeah, Zelda enemy names are always strange. The orange Dyra, to kill him, you kind of have to approach him the same way that you approach the Stelphos in the palaces. Walk forwards towards them, and then when they raise their axes, you duck, you slash, and just repeat that process. If you get into the rhythm, then they're not that difficult to fight off, but they do a lot of damage. And the red Dyra that I just fought, you could see that he actually throws his axe. And, I guess you can axe him a question if you want to get hit. So yes, here's another orange Dyra. Weird thing about the orange enemies in this game, if you do not have the candle, then normally all the enemies are invisible because you're in complete darkness, but the orange enemies will actually be perfectly visible, which I guess means that they decided not to darken the palette for the orange enemies because they thought, oh, the player is never going to get this far without the candle, so we don't need to darken this enemy, or this palette rather. So this is also annoying because... oh, that's actually a very fortuitous drop. Enemies can sometimes drop magic jars, you've seen this plenty already, but the red jars are dropped by the big enemies, so I was very lucky to get one off that enemy. I can heal myself with all of that magic that I just got back. And as you can see, I'm taking a magic level here to restore my magic again. That's another thing. When you get a magic or life level, all of your points in that category get restored as well, so you can actually use that to your advantage to get free refills. Okay, so we've got a couple more Dyras. Like, there are just so many Dyras in Death Mountain. Like, the required path throws so many of them at you. But they are, like, I think they expect you to have the life spell, so that's why they're giving me some free magic jars. So anyways, we've gotten through all of that. Now we can enter the very location where Ganon was in Zelda 1. And there are more red Dyras. Have I mentioned the plot of this game, by the way? I think I did. Like, Link is trying to find the Triforce in order to wake up the sleeping Princess Zelda, but the enemies have something going on with them too. Like, all of Ganon's minions really want to kill Link, probably for revenge, but also because they can use his corpse to revive Ganon by sacrificing it in a ritual or something. Like, that gives the enemies a reason to attack you, but one has to wonder, if Link, like, jumps into a lava pit, does that prevent the ritual from ever happening? Because the corpse would be completely burned, and I'm really talking about things that should not come up in a kid's game. But then again, blood sacrifices, rituals, I don't know. So you're supposed to take the elevator down here, and there's a red Dyra in your way again. To fight these guys, you basically just have to time your jumps over the axes. There's a sort of rhythm to how they throw their axes. And then in this room, we're introduced to another annoying enemy. So this enemy, I forget its name, but you can't hit it with anything other than a sword technique that we're going to pick up in this video. So I will explain more about that later. They're too low for your crouch stabbing to hit them. That's the thing. So even more Dyras now. Like, they're really guarding this area. It's probably got something really important in it. I wonder what that could be. Just one more red one. There's no blue Dyras in the area. Like, the enemies go orange, red, blue in terms of color-based strength. So they were guarding a simple hammer. That's what they were guarding. I don't know why a hammer is in Death Mountain. Like, wouldn't we have found it in Zelda 1, or was it placed there after Zelda 1? And if that's the case, how does Link know to come all the way down here and get it? Because you need that hammer. What it does is it lets you break blocks on the overworld. There are rocks that you can crush now on the overworld maps. So that actually unlocks a shortcut back to this area, which is good, because if you were to pick up the hammer and then lose your last life, then it would not be fun to have to travel all the way back here, because there's one more required item, and I have no idea how you're supposed to know to find it. But then again, you do find it by breaking a rock that's like right next to you when you exit this cave. Also, going for that magic jar was a waste of time, and I apologize for it. I don't know why I decided to get it, but whatever. Alright, so just have to get out of this area. Like, unfortunately, you have to backtrack through these caves. There's no quick exit. Palaces at least let you quickly exit the dungeon after putting the crystal in the statue. Now that we're out of there, we can break this rock, walk over it, and get this weird falling animation for some reason, and there's a magic container. So yes, the 4 magic containers that you can find, I may have forgotten to mention, they're required to beat the game. And some of them are hidden very well. So who knows how you're supposed to be able to find all of this on your own. Like, this was still the era where they were making a bunch of cryptic stuff because they wanted players to, like, experiment with it and then communicate with each other in real life to, like, figure all this stuff out by comparing notes and stuff. Like, this era of gaming was very based around that idea. So, it makes sense. Like, they'd never do this, well, I think they could get away with doing this in the modern age because we have the internet anyways, and people are very quick to find out this stuff. So at last we can put Death Mountain behind us and head north through this cave and wind up on our way towards another new town. But first we have to cross this very long bridge. This bridge has moblins on it. This is actually the first game to depict moblins using spears, or javelins in the case of the blue moblin. I don't think we've seen an orange moblin yet. They're probably just random encounters in the first forest in the game or something. So, now this is just mean. We have more bubbles and yet another red Dyra. Like, you think the player has had enough Dyras yet, Nintendo? Like, seriously. Like, they went through all of that, and in order to make the return trip, they have to get through this too. Now, I could use the up plus A trick. The up plus A trick where you pause and then push up plus A on controller 2 to instantly access the save and continue screen. That still works. It's also in Zelda 1 and the original Metroid. But if I use that, it counts as a game over. And in this game, if you get a game over, you actually lose all of your unspent experience points. Like, that's just really cruel. But if I had up plus 8, I could have gotten a shortcut back to the castle, and that would have let me maybe cut down on the backtracking just a little bit. But I still have to go up to this cave and break this rock to get in, because inside that cave is an important key item. You need it to get the next magic spell. So, like, that's actually pretty far away from the town you get the spell in fact, so it's a little bit strange. They don't even tell you where this item is. Oh, and the flying fish enemies are at it again. They're up to their usual tricks. Have I mentioned that these guys also drain your EXP whenever you get hit by them? There's a couple enemies like that. This game is just so brutal. More Dyras! You think we had enough of those? Like, there's probably a red one coming up too. Ah, yeah, I was right. I mean, of course I was right. I've played this dozens of times, so I kind of know this. And I would have had to watch the video beforehand. Okay, so yeah, at least he dropped a red magic jar and I could use the life spell now. You actually just saw me use a bit of a trick. When you pick up a... Oh, the item in here, by the way, is the Water of Life, which is a healing item from Zelda 1, and you needed to cure a sick kid. How nice. Anyways, what you actually just saw me do with a red magic jar is a bit of a trick. If you get a red magic jar, it recovers as many MP as your maximum MP, which kind of makes sense. However, you notice that the bar fills up very slowly. So if you cast a spell while the bar is filling up, like, it's still going to fill up as many MP as it intended to, even if it technically gave you more MP than it was supposed to. Like, say you have 16 MP left, and you get the red magic jar, your max MP is 72, it's going to recover 72 MP even if you cast a spell to spend some of that MP. So, like, you end up with a net gain, in other words. It's kind of weird to explain it verbally without, like, actually having a visual guide or whatever. But with the Water of Life in our hands, we can now advance to... Well, I'm not going to go to the town, actually. I decided to go and get a heart container first. Because with the hammer, you can now enter this cave, and there's going to be a heart container in it. Yeah, I guess I should have re-watched this video in order to see what order I do everything in. I casted the shield spell there. It's actually going to save my life, because Gorias are not fun to fight when you're in such tight quarters as that. And no enemy on this screen, thankfully. So there's our second heart container. There are only 4 of them in the game, and you don't need to collect them, but you probably want to collect them because of how brutal the difficulty of this game is. So every extra hit point counts. I would have liked for them to maybe, like, add some more heart and magic containers to collect, just to make it possible to increase your survivability just a little bit more, I guess. So finally, we're going to, well, first an enemy is going to get in my way. Yeah. Now I'm going to advance to the next town and get the spell that I wanted. Like, I don't need this immediately right away, but, you know, it's nice to get it now. Get that out of the way so I don't have to later. So the harbor town of Mido. I guess someone at least must have liked Mido because he got a town named after him too. So in this town, there is a spell, and there is also a sword technique. This game, well, I have to get some magic back in order to actually get the sword technique, because, like, they require you to use the jump spell in order to get the sword technique. But first I will talk about the spell that I'm getting. We never actually see the kid that gets cured by the Water of Life, because the house is always empty, save for the wise man that gives you the magic spell. And the spell he is going to give me is also required in some areas in order to progress. It is the fairy spell. Like, this is really weird for Zelda veterans, I bet. This is the only Zelda game where Link can turn into a fairy. Like, he's transformed into stuff in later games, but a fairy, not likely. Let's hope he doesn't get put in a bottle by an enemy somewhere. That would actually be highly amusing. Like, if one of them had a fairy net or something. So the fairy spell doesn't really let you do much. It lets you fly around the screen freely, and that does let you get into some places you normally wouldn't be able to, but doesn't really do much. It also lets you bypass locked doors because you can slip through the keyhole, which is a really nice addition. So if you jump up to the roof of the church and enter this room, you will find a knight who will teach you how to do the downward stab technique. This is also the first Zelda game where Link learns additional sword techniques. The down stab technique has become very iconic over the years. It's gone on to appear as part of Link's moveset in every Super Smash Bros. Game, and it's also part of Link's moveset in Soul Calibur 2, where he makes an appearance as a guest fighter. So it's nice that they keep referencing back to this game, even though it's such an oddball game in the series. Actually, I think the reason they like the downstab so much is because it turns the sword into a total pogo stick. You can literally bounce on enemies when you use it. Like, it's weird that the platformer Zelda game gives Link so many abilities that make him more like Super Mario, but I guess that comes naturally. So, now it's time to actually advance on the second palace. And interesting thing is, I haven't really talked about the differences between the Famicom version and the NES version, but in the Famicom version, like I mentioned how I feel that the Famicom version is unfinished. One of the reasons for that is that every palace in the Famicom version, except for the final palace, looks exactly the same. Like, they switched the color palette one time, but other than that, every palace has that same gray tile set that the first palace has in the NES version. So the NES version gave every palace its own unique tile set, and I think that's a good thing. I would prefer that over looking at gray or blue the entire time. So you have to kind of go through this swamp in order to get to the palace. Swamp terrain, as you can see, lowers your movement speed. And I could have avoided this encounter by just staying on the roads. For some reason, monsters never appear on the roads in Zelda 2, which is made reference to in Ocarina of Time, because in Hyrule Field, if you stay on the roads, the Stall Children enemies never appear, which is a nice reference back to this game again. So, entering Palace 2 now, you might have noticed that there's a statue at the beginning of the palace. If you hit it with your sword, either an enemy will come out or a red magic jar will come out. And if an enemy comes out, you can simply exit and re-enter the palace until you get your red magic jar. Of course, you can also use this for level grinding if you want to. And even if an enemy does appear, you can just exit and re-enter if you are going for a red magic jar. So this palace can potentially be a little bit more confusing than the first palace, but the first thing you want to do is take the elevator all the way down and go right. That's where you'll find the first key. Now in this area, the way these platforms are laid out can make it difficult to fight this enemy because he's always throwing his clubs in an arc like this. So it can be difficult to slip in there and start hitting him. But we have the down stab, so it's actually possible to just bounce on his head until he's gone. Like, they don't expect you to have the down stab for this palace. They definitely expect it in Palace 3, but this is Palace 2. So they're not expecting the down stab quite yet. So it can be useful in situations such as that, and also situations such as this. It would be very annoying to wait for an opening to attack those slimes while you're on your way out of here. But you can just bounce on them and be on your way. Next, take the elevator up one level and head to the left. And this is where we get... I don't know what these are called, but they kind of remind me of Mario's piranha plants. You know, I guess Zelda and Mario coming from the same developer, there was always going to be at least a little bit of overlap when they decide to make a Zelda platformer. Hey, speaking of downstabbing, these blue Stalfos actually have the ability to downstab you, but they won't be able to jump if they are in tight quarters such as that, so it's very advantageous to fight them in situations like this. And if they do try to jump towards you like that, then they leave themselves very much wide open. So now that I've got level 4 in all 3 stats, I think I'm actually going to collect enough EXP to get attack 5. That's going to cost me 2,000 points. So hopefully I do not game over by then. Of course, I know I'm not going to game over by then because I've seen the end of this video. So take the elevator back up to the first level and then head to the left, kill a blue Stalfos. And now we get introduced to the Castlevania Medusa heads. Like, these guys... Like, speaking of Castlevania, did you notice that Link makes the same oop noise that Simon Belmont does when he gets hit? Like, it's so weird. That's 2 things that they took from Castlevania. I don't know if they're allowed to do that. I know there's, like, this, like, in those days, there was kind of this, general purpose, like, publicly available sound database thing. I don't know. I can't figure out the right words for it, but... If you've noticed that there are some sound effects that are common to particular games or anime, then that's probably the reason why. A public repository of sound effects. I guess that's what I'm looking for. So as you can see, the Iron Knuckles have returned. They are going to block our path here while we have to deal with bubbles that drain our magic. That's always annoying. And this is also the dungeon where they introduce stronger variants of Iron Knuckles, so I hope you're ready for that. This room doesn't have any of them, it just has more bubbles. I think at this attack level I could potentially kill them, but that would still take a while and it's not really worth it. You only get 50 EXP for it. So at that elevator, go down 1 level and then head off to the left. You will pass through a locked door, and these enemies are not really that difficult. But in this room, something interesting happens. We get introduced to the falling blocks rooms. These are really weird, and I don't know why they're in this dungeon, but they're going to be part of a sort of puzzle later on. There are sometimes keys that you have to use the falling blocks to get to, and that's going to be annoying. So here is the first stronger variant of the Iron Knuckle. The red Iron Knuckle is simply an orange Iron Knuckle with more stats. And you have to kill 2 of them in order to get this dungeon's item. So I'm kind of trying to use this technique where you crouch stab as you are falling. That didn't work out so well. I think I should just be fighting them traditionally. And the down stab is not really that useful on them as of yet, because if you try it, then you'll probably bounce over the enemy, but you'll just hit their shield and that won't do any damage. So yeah, just going to fight this one normally. I think they're a little bit quicker than the orange Iron Knuckles when it comes to blocking. But yes, you've still got to be very careful. You can still block them with your shield. And we've now obtained, I am not kidding, this thing is the Power Glove. It's so bad. Yeah, everyone's got to make that reference whenever they find an item called a Power Glove, I guess. So what it does is it allows your sword to break rocks, such as the one that fall on this screen. Now, this is very interesting because we have the hammer, which can break rocks on the overworld, and the Power Glove lets us break rocks with our sword in the palaces. So, like, why do we have two separate items that do the same thing, essentially? I don't know. Like, I kind of feel that as interesting as it was to have Death Mountain from the previous game resurface again as a sort of mini dungeon that you have to go through, like, you have to go through that really intense, really tough mini dungeon just to get an item that does the same thing the Power Glove does, except it works on the overworld. It's so very strange. Ah yes, we also have a ghost that shoots fireballs at you. It's really not much of a threat on its own, but when you pair it with Iron Knuckles, it gets really annoying. So in this room we have blocks that you have to crush using the Power Glove, and you can make your way through this room. Fighting Stalfos is not really that difficult to attack level 4, even if it is paired with annoying bullets from those heads on the walls. Like, they don't even do that much damage. They're not really that big of a problem. In fact, when you have a choice between getting hit by something that does more damage and something that does less damage, obviously you should try and get hit by the thing that does less damage because you'll have invincibility frames for avoiding the stronger enemy. Yes, I decided to bounce on that bubble for a little bit, but then decided to move past. Now, naturally, those aren't literally bubbles. They're just called bubbles for some reason, because they're like floating skulls in a fire bubble. I don't know. So we've seen this enemy before, having a little bit of trouble because of the elevated platform in the center there. And annoyingly, that statue does not give me a red magic jar, so unfortunately I'm stuck with this amount of health for the remainder of the time until I lose a life. But with that key, we can now make our advance on the boss of the dungeon. Now, I mentioned that this boss is easier than the boss of the first palace. I think that's because for the first palace, you don't have the downstab. Like, you can have the downstab for this palace's boss, so that might make him a little bit easier. Using the shield spell just in case I get hit by this guy one too many times. And he was kind enough to drop another experience point back, so that's nice. And there's another one here as well. If you have the downstab, that's much, much easier to get, because you have to deal with the crumbling floor if you want to pick up that experience point bag. Also, there are hidden experience point bags throughout the world as well, but much like with the 1-ups, if you collect them, then they are gone from the game forever. You cannot pick them up again. And that's bad if you pick one up and then subsequently get a game over, because then you lose those points. So yes, Red Iron Knuckles, a little bit more difficult than I was expecting, and so lost a life. But that is okay. The boss is right behind this room, so I am totally fine with taking a death if it means I start the boss battle with more health. And magic, of course, too. So just going to poke at this guy over and over again. So something that's amusing that you can do is that you can actually push the guy off screen, and then he will fall into the abyss. Oh, there's one more screen before the boss, so maybe that happens here. It's just blue Stalfos and an orange Iron Knuckle. It was very easy to dispatch him. And this red Iron Knuckle. Yeah, I think I'm going to push this guy off screen. And I could potentially bounce over him with the downstab, but this is more amusing, I think. Whee! He's gone! Where did he go? Who knows? It's boss time. So this enemy is a suit of armor. When you hit it, the head comes off, and then the heads start floating around and shooting more bullets at you. Or at least they're supposed to. So, one thing you can do with this guy is you can use the rising crouch stab, as you can see. Jump and then crouch and then stab. And if you have enough points available for the jump spell, you could potentially also just jump on top of him and down stab. Like, if you have that technique as well. So with him defeated, we have enough points to get attack level 5, and I think I'm just going to put the crystal into the statue and get life level 5 as well. Like, I can't, I don't want to, like, super optimize my experience points gains by grinding another, like, 1,200 points and then coming back to put the crystal in the statue. Like, no reason to do that all the time, but I will do it a couple more times. There's, like, 4 more palaces left. So that's going to do it for this episode. I'm going to use the up+8 trick to get myself out of here and save the game. Like, as soon as I realize I can do that, of course. See you later, everybody. That's going to do it for this episode.